Why does God let bad things happen? Nearly every human culture has asked the same question, not because people enjoy philosophy, but because suffering eventually becomes personal. A diagnosis, a betrayal, a disaster, a child lost too soon. The question isn't simply whether God exists. It's why a good God would allow a world where pain is unavoidable. What's fascinating is that psychology and neuroscience reveal something unexpected. The human brain is almost incapable of accepting suffering without searching for meaning. Understanding that search doesn't answer every theological question, but it does explain why this question has remained one of humanity's deepest intellectual puzzles. Researchers call this meaning-making. It's the brain's tendency to connect events into a coherent story. Randomness feels psychologically uncomfortable because your brain is constantly trying to predict what happens next. Prediction keeps you alive. If painful events seem meaningless, that prediction system struggles. Neuroscientists have found that brain regions involved in self-reflection, particularly what's known as the default mode network, become highly active when people try to understand difficult experiences. Instead of simply recalling facts, your brain starts asking larger questions. Why did this happen? Why now? Why me? This tendency isn't a flaw, it's part of human cognition. Psychologist Viktor Frankl, whose observations later influenced decades of psychological research, argued that people can endure extraordinary hardship when they perceive meaning within it. Modern studies in positive psychology and trauma research support part of that idea. People who eventually recover well from adversity often don't erase their suffering. They reorganize it into a larger life narrative. But neuroscience also warns of another tendency. Your brain is exceptionally good at detecting patterns, even when none exist. This is known as pattern perception. Humans frequently connect unrelated events because evolution favored false positives over false negatives. Mistaking rustling leaves for a predator costs little. Ignoring an actual predator can be fatal. That same tendency leads people to search for hidden causes behind tragedy. Behavioral economist Daniel Kahneman described something similar through cognitive biases. One is the brain's discomfort with randomness. People naturally prefer explanations, even incomplete ones, over uncertainty. That's why suffering often creates two competing responses. One person concludes that suffering proves God doesn't exist. Another concludes that suffering must have a divine purpose. Interestingly, psychology suggests both responses emerge from the same underlying mental process, the need to create an understandable world. Science can explain why people ask these questions. It cannot determine whether God exists or what God's intentions are. That distinction matters. The question, why does God allow suffering, belongs partly to theology and philosophy because it concerns purpose, morality, and divine intention, topics that cannot be tested inside a laboratory. Scientific research can examine human beliefs, emotional responses, and brain activity. It cannot measure God's motives. Even so, neuroscience offers another remarkable insight. The brain doesn't experience physical pain and emotional pain as completely separate events. Brain imaging studies show significant overlap between the neural networks activated by physical injury and social rejection. Losing someone you love literally changes activity in many of the same regions involved in bodily pain. Pain isn't simply a sensation, it's information. Biologically, pain exists because organisms that ignored damage rarely survived. Emotional pain serves a similar purpose. It draws attention to broken relationships, violated expectations, or significant loss. That doesn't mean every tragedy has a hidden lesson. It means pain itself has biological functions, regardless of whether someone interprets it spiritually. Stress research led by neuroscientist Robert Sapolsky adds another layer. Chronic, uncontrollable stress can impair memory, attention, immune function, and emotional regulation through prolonged exposure to cortisol, the body's primary stress hormone. Yet, another finding appears almost paradoxical. Moderate, manageable challenges often strengthen resilience. Psychologists call this stress inoculation. Like a vaccine exposes the immune system to a weakened threat, manageable adversity can improve future coping abilities. Studies suggest people who experience no adversity at all often cope less effectively than those who have faced moderate difficulties. Notice the important limitation. This does not imply that devastating tragedies are good. Research consistently shows severe trauma can produce lasting psychological harm. The existence of growth after trauma doesn't justify the trauma itself. That distinction is often misunderstood. Some people interpret resilience research as evidence that suffering is necessary or even desirable. Scientists don't make that claim. Instead, they observe something profoundly human. The brain can sometimes transform painful experiences into wisdom, stronger relationships, or renewed purpose. That's called post-traumatic growth, and it has been documented across many cultures. Importantly, it doesn't happen automatically, and not everyone experiences it. This is where psychology meets philosophy. If suffering can produce growth, that doesn't prove God intended it. If suffering causes profound harm, that doesn't disprove God either. Evidence can describe outcomes. Meaning remains an interpretation. Cognitive scientist Lisa Feldman Barrett has argued that emotions are not simply reactions imposed on you. They're actively constructed by the brain using past experiences, predictions, and context. Two people can encounter similar hardship, yet interpret it in dramatically different ways. The external event may be identical. The internal meaning may not. That's one reason suffering often changes beliefs rather than simply confirming them. For some, hardship strengthens faith. For others, it weakens it. Psychology explains why both reactions are psychologically understandable without declaring either one objectively correct. Perhaps that's the most surprising insight. The deepest question isn't only why bad things happen. It's why humans refuse to stop searching for meaning in them. Your brain evolved to predict, explain, and connect experiences into a coherent story. Science can map the neural circuits involved in that search. It can identify the hormones, cognitive biases, and psychological mechanisms shaping your interpretation. But whether suffering ultimately has divine purpose remains beyond the reach of neuroscience. That boundary is worth remembering. Science is extraordinarily powerful at explaining how people think. Faith and philosophy attempt to answer why existence itself has meaning. The question of why God allows suffering may never receive a universally accepted answer. Yet modern research reveals something remarkable. The search for that answer isn't a weakness of the human mind. It's one of its defining features. Understanding that doesn't solve the mystery, but it changes how you understand the people who continue asking it.